Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition around the round table. We have Penna Dexter, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and we will be looking at all sorts of issues. Just a minute, we will get into the whole question of Scott Pruitt. He's been in the news for some time, and probably, as one particular article we've posted on our website says, perhaps has the biggest target on his back. Of course, the person with the biggest target is Donald Trump, but next is certainly Scott Pruitt. Some of you might say, who? Others might say, oh, yeah, I know who he is. And, of course, you probably will be hearing a lot more about him over the next few weeks because of all sorts of things that have been used by the media to attack him. But also this hour, we'll spend some time maybe getting into the issue of immigration. Of course, we've had the caravan that made its way from the southern border of Mexico and is kind of stalled a little bit. But, again, will some of those individuals make it their way to the southern border of the United States? We have a citizenship question on the census. Buddy Matthews has written about that. I have a commentary coming out next week on that, so that is appropriate. And we, as we talk about immigration, have a piece by Ann Coulter. So those are just a few things we'll talk about in this first hour. Second hour, we'll be getting into issues of religious liberty. Andrew Hyatt will be with us. He is the director for Paul, the Apostle of Christ, and we have a lot more to cover. Penna, always lots to talk about.
Yes, and Kerby, I love the fact that Point of View is bringing in the directors and the filmmakers of some of these great movies that are of interest to conservatives and Christians. And this one, Paul, the Apostle of Christ, has been something that I've actually been, you saw it, I haven't seen it yet, but I've been interested in seeing it, and it's going to be fun to speak with Andrew Hyatt.
I'm looking forward to that. You know, we've had the Kendrick brothers, and of course, they've done all sorts of really great Christian films. About 2 weeks ago, we had the Irwin brothers on because they, of course, did a film that maybe you've heard about, I Can Only Imagine, which has done extremely well, even to the point where they were just shocked themselves. So we always like to promote some of these Christian films, faith-based films. This one, of course, has a little more concern because it takes you back to a time when you had the Neronian persecution, Christians being persecuted. So I'll give a kind of a parental advisory in that regard, but nevertheless, just again, helps you understand who Paul was, who Luke was, how the book of Acts was written, and a lot of great stuff that we'll get into in the next hour. But we're going to talk about Scott Pruitt, and one of the things I always appreciate about Dr. Merrill Matthews is that he knows these people, and you know Scott Pruitt, and I would have to say that he's not half the villain that the media has made him out to be. What would you say?
I think he's not half the villain. As you say, I do know him. I've known him for a while. I haven't talked to him for a couple of years, so we have not communicated or anything. So, but in full disclosure, we do know him. But he has always been a nice, articulate guy. Saw him at CPAC as a speaker at CPAC, did a very good job. He knew going into the EPA he would have a target on his back, perhaps more so than any other cabinet secretary, except for, and then the president himself being on top of that. But going into this, you know you're going to be targeted, and they're going to try to oust you. And so you've got to be not only above reproach, you've got to be mindful that everything you do is going to be scrutinized.
Yes. Well, in Penna, I always said that when you have a cabinet officer, number one, you want them to have good policy. Number two, you'd like them to clean up the swamp, which means letting go individuals who are not career civil service people that you can get out there and bringing good people in. And number three, having behavior and character above reproach. Well, Scott Pruitt's done 2 out of 3, but that third one has really been in the news lately, hasn't it?
Well, it has. And, it's sort of been a coordinated hit on him.
Yes.
And he has been, arguably one of the most effective assets in the Trump cabinet, because he's taken the EPA and he's gotten rid of a lot of regulations. He's gotten rid of a lot of the entrenched bureaucrats there. He's tackled the abuse of the rule of law at the EPA, of which it's been very, very guilty in the Obama administration and other administrations. The EPA is a tool of the left, in a sense. The Wall Street Journal says that he's taking on green idols where others would be bowing down to them.
I love that line. That was one of the best lines.
Yeah, I loved it too. And I think, so in one sense, yes, he needed to be perhaps more careful. Some of the charges against him have to do with the cost of the travel. But in his defense, he does have such a target. He has to have extra security. There have been some first-class flights that have actually been necessitated for security reasons. So that's one. There's another issue about where he lived during his first days in the administration in D.C. He rented a room from the wife of an Oklahoma law firm's partner. And that law firm has energy clients. And so, of course, that was a big attack situation. But I've seen some pretty good explanations on that. But what it does say, as Buddy brought up, is you have to be extra squeaky clean and careful when you are in this type of a position. So many have found that out already. It would be a shame if President Trump didn't stick with him, though, because he's so effective. And I don't think you get anybody through as a replacement for him near as good as he is.
Even being extra squeaky clean, you're going to be under attack. Remember when Mike Pence said, well, I only go out to dinner with my wife, and he was immediately attacked for that.
Controversial? Yeah. That was even controversial. Yeah.
That was even controversial. So you've got to look back and say, how can they criticize this? And if you're getting $50 a night for your room, and that looks like it might be a problem because somebody might have business before them, you just need to avoid that. So I would argue he should have been a little more thoughtful in saying, is this something that could be attacked? I need to be a step ahead of that.
Yes. And again, if you've ever seen the list, and I've got the one here that is a whole list from the Washington Post, demanded 24-hour-a-day security. We'll come back to that one in just a minute. Installed a soundproof phone system in his office, flew first class at a cost of $100,000 plus charter and military flights. In just a minute, I'm going to also compare that to the 2 previous EPA administrators, and you'll find that there's some things that are sauce for the liberal goose, but not for the conservative gander. But nevertheless, EPA explored hiring a private jet service, and as you pointed out, Penna, when he first moved to Washington, stayed in a townhouse owned by the wife of a lobbyist at the rate of $50 a night. So you can come up with the list. And before we go to the break, let me just mention that when you look at this, you have 2 previous administrators, Lisa Jackson in particular, served from 2009 to 2013. But again, as the EPA director at that time, spent more than $332,000 on airfare and security for a couple of trips. And we're talking about trips to Tel Aviv, Rio de Janeiro, Montreal, Beijing. Then you come to the more recent one, Gina McCarthy, and spent $630,000 on airfare and security, an average of $63,000 per trip. So the bottom line is we understand that the game is played in such a way where there's lots of scrutiny on this Mr. Pruitt, Scott Pruitt, but on the other hand, we kind of ignore some of the things that happened in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the other side of this, you can see why the left hates him so much when you start to look at some of the things he did. And one of the big things, of course, is being a primary player in pulling us out of the Paris Climate Accord. And that, that has raised the hackles of so many, even on the Republican side. So, you have people that perhaps are not defending him that you would hope would. We'll discuss more of that after the break.
Well, let's take a break. We'll come back with more. We have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent essay, Ravi Zacharias devoted a few paragraphs to the importance of moral reasoning and an ethical foundation. He reminded us of the insight that can be found in the book The Roads to Modernity. Gertrude Himmelfarb makes a very powerful statement in the book. She argues that the difference between the European Enlightenment and the English and American Enlightenment was really one word. For the French philosophers, reasoning was supreme. For the English and American philosophers, moral reasoning was supreme. Ed McBurk makes a similar observation in his commentary. Ethics, morality, and moral reasoning were important not only in this period of time, but were also important in the framing of our government. Ravi Zacharias then goes on to tell of a dinner in a European country that he attended. One of the heads of a prestigious school of business proudly stated that a class in ethics was not part of their curriculum. As the topic of conversation moved from curriculum to impact, several moments later he said that in the last national election, 3 of the candidates were graduates of their school. What happened, I asked. One lost because he was a womanizer, the second lost because he was an alcoholic, and the third because he was corrupt, was his answer. Ravi Zacharias then said that his wife whispered in his ear, maybe it's time they started teaching ethics. Yes, it's probably time they began thinking about teaching ethics in that school and in the major universities of Europe and America. The problem, of course, is they can't even agree about the moral foundation necessary to effectively discuss ethics. Once you reject a belief in biblical absolutes, any ethical conversation quickly devolves into a discussion about personal moral preferences. This is often what we're left with in this world of postmodern personal truth and relative ethics. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films, Paul, Apostle of Christ, starring Jim Caviezel, rated PG-13, now playing. Information at paulmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation. And we're talking for just a few more minutes about Scott Pruitt. And again, if you're not familiar with him, individual who is the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency. Penn, I guess I'm old enough to remember when Richard Nixon started the EPA. And at the time, it sounded like a good idea because we had the need for clean water and clean air and all of the rest. But it has become a place where, again, don't you love the Wall Street Journal, where people want to bow down to the green idol. But the Wall Street Journal also said this: Donald Trump demands loyalty down the chain of command, but up this chain of command, I should say, but loyalty down has been another matter. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not Scott Pruitt is replaced. I hope that he is not, because he's doing a lot of good, isn't he?
Yeah, Trump at first, when confronted with this, just kind of didn't answer. And then a little bit later, he made a statement in support of Scott Pruitt. But, you know, we just don't know where all of it will go. But when you look at some of the things that he's done, that he's accomplished, and we did post something from the Federalist by Molly Hemingway that you could read, and it would just help you, I think, to understand why the left has so much problems with him. But he's tackled the abuse of the rule of law, as we said, at the EPA. He's finalized more than 20 deregulatory actions, saving more than $1 billion in regulatory costs. And then he's worked to scrap the Obama administration regulations that exceeded EPA authority and harmed the coal industry. And he also rescinded some confusing and contradictory water regulations that farmers and ranchers were being harmed by. He's worked to pull back some of the unfair parts of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. He, as I said, shepherded the retreat from the Paris Climate Accord. He's been cleaning up Superfund sites. And as the Federalist says, he's not some anti-environmentalist. He's actually done things like award $100 million to upgrade drinking water in Flint, Michigan. So, and that gold, the EPA was responsible for a horrible
the Gold King mine.
The Gold King mine in Colorado and Utah, and he's worked to correct that. So, he's been very effective, let's put it that way. And the left hates him.
He's also done some things to really rile the left in other ways. The EPA has a group of science advisors to them. He said, if you're going to be an advisor to the EPA, you can't be on a contract to the EPA. We can't be paying you, and then you're coming and advising us. That got a lot of ire from the scientists and the environmentalists who put in the liberal environmentalists who were paid by the EPA for contracts. That seemed like that seems like a good ethics deal, but he got criticized for that. And then, of course, the cafe standards, he's come up here recently and said we're going to scale these back a little bit. The cafe standards are the mileage goals that the administration imposes upon car makers. At sort of in the waning days of the Obama administration, they said we're going to bump that up to, I think it was 54.5 miles, something like that. How you put that 0.5 in there? Because that's all a scam. It doesn't actually relate to what we drive, but they put those in towards the last waning days of the Obama administration. He's trying to pull that back. So there's several things he's done that just has really irritated the left and has scaled back some of the things they wanted to do.
You raised something before we even get back to policy. Just talk about process, because one of the criticisms of Scott Pruitt is that sometimes he has unilaterally done this without consultation with some of the people at the EPA. That cafe standard and some of those others were done unilaterally by the previous administration.
Absolutely.
So it's okay.
And out of the blue, I mean, Obama came up and said, "Wait, we're going to do this," and people, wait a minute, I thought we already had the things in there set, and you've just decided to raise them.
So it's okay for Gina McCarthy, the previous EPA administrator, to do some things just with a stroke of a pen. Or maybe a pen and a phone. I don't know if she uses the same kind of strategy as the president, but it's not all right for Scott Pruitt to do that. And of course, I really believe in the rule of law. Back to that issue, most of the criticism that he's hearing is a criticism that would have been more relevant if it had been brought to the previous administration. Yeah. But there was a complete pass given to the two EPA administrators. Scott Pruitt comes in. Whole new game being played, right?
When you look at the Environmental Protection Agency, it is a huge bureaucracy that has so much effect on the lives of Americans that people don't really realize it. And when you look at these cafe standards, for instance, raising the cafe standard up to 54.5 miles per gallon, I mean, that's really telling us what kind of vehicles we are supposed to drive.
Right.
And the ones that we as Americans prefer, we're willing to pay more for the gas that we need to put in them, are usually bigger, heavier, and safer. They carry more people. But, the government, the liberals, want us to drive tiny cars that are less safe, that use less gas. But in a sense, sometimes they don't use less gas, because if gas is cheaper or whatever, we'll just drive more anyway. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal this week by the head of the General Counsel of the American Competitive Enterprise Institute. They work on these issues. Coffee won't kill you, but cafe might. Mm-hmm. So really, more deaths, more accidents. Accidents are more lethal under these standards. So that's just one area where the EPA affects our lives. Another area, of course, is all these regulations. I mean, our economy has improved partially because many regulations on companies that have been, because of the environment, have been repealed. So many ways in which this agency affects Americans, we should understand it a little more. And certainly this is why the left is so threatened by these reforms in the EPA.
My favorite story about the environmental regulations is that William McKinley, you might know who he was, a president. Mm-hmm. There is a statue of him in Northern California, and the Indians want to take it down because, of course, he had a bad record, they say, with the Indians. but they haven't been able to take it down like they have been able to take down some of the others of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, because they have to file an environmental impact statement about removing a statue of President William McKinley, which eventually will probably come down. But this just illustrates again kind of some of the lack of sanity, Dr. Merrill Matthews, when we talk about some of these EPA regulations.
That's true. And let me defend Scott Pruitt on one other area. It was my understanding, I may have been wrong, but it's my understanding that cabinet level officers of the government were allowed to fly first class.
That is true.
And so the notion that he flies first class, people who fly a lot, and he's doing, if you're a cabinet secretary, especially EPA and energy secretary and other things, you're out a lot. It gets really hard on the body, especially if you're not a young kid anymore, having to do that, especially going overseas. If I have to fly to London, I've been to Israel and so forth, I'm a basket case for a couple of days.
Yeah. And he can't afford to be a basket case for a couple of days.
Because I can't get in the room and sleep in that. So I just can't find in me to be critical if somebody's flying first class overseas and other places, especially if you're doing a lot, because you can get more work done and you're fresher when you get there.
Yes, and every once in a while I'll have somebody say, why aren't you complaining about how much money was spent first under the Obama administration, the golf trips that he took, or now under the Trump administration? I said, look, you've got to understand, when we're looking at some of these expenses, and let's just take one that was seen as so egregious, $25,000 for a phone system in his office. Okay. That's not even a percentage of a rounding error in the EPA budget. When you're talking about the national spending bill of $1.3 trillion, $25,000, it's a lot of money for all of us around the table, but it's still not a lot of money for the government. After a while, you do have to say, let's not worry about that. Let's worry about all the policies that are actually preventing people from having jobs.
You can start to talk about the money that's being generated because businesses are more profitable and they have some of this draconian regulation lifted off of them. I mean, it's almost, it really is apples and oranges.
Yeah. When people complain that Michelle Obama brought her daughters and her mother and all her friends and her staff, and they went to Africa, and it was at best a goodwill trip, I said, let's not even talk about that. It's just not worth the effort when you have individuals making stupid decisions that cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and in a few cases, tens of millions of dollars. That's where you want to focus your time and attention. So anyway, we just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Scott Pruitt. You have heard about him, and maybe you've, on this program, heard something that you haven't heard before. This article, which Penna mentioned, and Penna, thank you for suggesting it, by Molly Hemingway. Very good. Scott Pruitt is Trump's biggest asset. When we come back, though, we also have some things about immigration, and I would love to get both of your comments about the issue of sending the National Guard to the border, why that may or may not make sense, and most importantly, I know that I've read a piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews about the census question of citizenship. And I think there's some very good reasons for that. The Justice Department wants to have a better ability to enforce Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That should be reason enough, and usually is. But this is a different administration. Everything Trump does is controversial, so we'll talk about that right after this.
Rebecca Hagelin has been influencing public policy as an author, columnist, and executive at places like the Heritage Foundation for more than 30 years, and Point of View Radio stoked her fire.
I used to turn it on every day, and when my husband would come home from work, I would say, this is what they said on Point of View today, and this is what they said. I just wanted to be connected into the places where I could make a difference.
Rebecca has made a big difference with her life, and let's just say she's a big fan.
There's no better resource, there's no better truth sayer, there's no better place to go for information for people who are worthy of their money than Point of View.
Point of View makes a difference by inspiring and informing people who make a difference. And you can make a difference today when you invest in the Truth Team. Join us today. Find out how by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team, 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us. And if you would like to join us, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Also, of course, many of you tend to listen online or also watch us on the YouTube channel, and I'll check that in just a minute. Haven't been real good at checking to see if any of you have questions or comments there, so that's another way in which you can begin to involve yourself in the program here. But I thought we'd spend just a few minutes at least talking about immigration. We're going to be talking about this a lot more, I think, over the next couple of weeks. Back on March 25th, a group decided that they were going to annually, as they always do, have a caravan that moves, in this case, primarily from Honduras to the southern border of Mexico. When they got there, they found that the border guards had abandoned, so they just continued heading north. And eventually, of course, the Mexican government began to take some action, I think in part because of some of the tweets from President Donald Trump. At the same time, of course, Donald Trump was saying, wait a minute, we might have an invasion at our southern border. So maybe we need to send the National Guard to the southern border. And, of course, a lot of people said that's unprecedented. And, of course, we quoted earlier in the week from everybody from Gary Bauer to Representative Louis Gohmert saying, no, actually, you can go all the way back to Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama at one time or another have had various troops at the border. And, of course, if you want to go back over 100 years, Woodrow Wilson even sent down General Pershing and wanted to make sure that Pancho Villa didn't make his way into the United States. So what about that? Dr. Merrill Matthews, you're a student of history. Is there something really controversial about sending the National Guard to the southern border?
No, I don't think there's anything really controversial, especially if you feel like there's a threat coming. And Donald Trump has made it clear with this this migration that was moving forth, which I understand is generally sort of breaking up now. But you've got, I mean, when you listen to the Border Patrol people talk about it, people come across pretty much at will. They present themselves. They oftentimes say, I'm here for, because I'm persecuted. They're able to oftentimes then get asylum and given a date to appear before a judge, of which they sometimes show up and sometimes they don't.
So that's the old catch and release problem that we need to get to.
That's the catch and release problem that we need to get to. And of course, the other part is I think roughly 40% of the people who are here illegally overstaying visas. And we don't have apparently a very good process for handling that. So our immigration situation is just a mess, and we don't seem to be able to move anything through it. And we need to address it with with some kind of immigration reform, because we've got we're at full employment now, just 4.1%. They've announced today that I think they hired 103,000 people last month, and that was considered on the low side. At some point, you're not able to hire people because you're generally at full employment and nobody out there needs a job. And if we're going to expand as an economy, we need to have a system where we can hire. We have workers who are here and want to work and are able to work, but doesn't necessarily mean citizenship. It just means you've got workers out there who are here and able to work, especially in some jobs.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of jobs, unless you're a teacher, and I've heard that there are a lot of teachers walking off the job here in Oklahoma and Kentucky and Arizona, but that's another story, which we did talk about earlier in the week. Penna, what about this idea of the National Guard and what's happening at the border? We, of course, have an article here called Dysfunctional Immigration. It's an Ann Coulter piece, but you've been looking at some of those facts and figures as well. So what would you say?
Well, it is dysfunctional, but it can be reformed. I mean, in our country right now, things are changing. We have reached almost full employment, but the problem is some of the people and the jobs aren't matched up training-wise, locale-wise. For instance, people are in this kind of a situation, they're less willing to move for a job. So you still have things, reforms that can be done. You can also do something about agricultural workers coming temporarily, which we've done before in this country. So when he says that we need reform, we do need reform. And we also need a strong sort of barrier at the border. Not only people, but also, I think, a wall. I agree with that effort. And, these National Guard people going, I mean, you can talk about the other presidents that have sent the National Guard. It's not that unusual to do it. But they could also be employed with the Army Corps of Engineers to build the wall or to, plan the walls across the border there. So it kind of could all work together if it was done well.
My understanding is the National Guard will not be directly interacting with the Border Patrol at the border, but will do other things, coordination, monitoring things, and other things to give the Border Patrol to free them up to be able to do the work actually addressing those who are trying to come across illegally. But I'll tell you, I've got a friend of Irish descent who runs a yard maintenance organization. He told me some months ago, he said, I've always tried to do this open and above board. He said I needed to get some people in to work, but the requirements, he had to run 2 ads advertising for American citizens. It cost him $750 to do that. He had to fly them, he had to bring them in and so forth. And he said, the expense is significant. And he said, I pay like $10 an hour for this, and I still can't get workers here to do that. The ones that they're oftentimes going to construction, which will pay more. But you do have workers, you do have people who need workers, and a lot of Americans are just not willing to do some of those jobs.
Well, and I understand that. I've put roofs on houses in Texas.
I've
You've
roofed
done
myself.
that. I've been a janitor.
Framing and
dug dishes and done, the weed eating and all that. And after a while, you recognize that there are some that are saying, yes, whatever you will pay, I will work because I want to support myself and send money back to Mexico. So I do understand that. And Penna, that's back to that idea of having work visas and things of that nature. If we had an organized system, those kinds of things could happen without any kind of challenge or concern, right?
That's right. And I think there's sometimes things have to be tried, to prove that they work, or maybe this isn't the best way to go. But yeah, we just need some reform in our immigration system. And I think what stops us from really reforming it is because just the people coming in. It's slowed down a little bit under President Trump, but it hasn't stopped. There's still about 1,000 people a day coming in.
Yes. Well, and that's the other question that some people have asked, and I saw that even on Fox News the other day. Why, Mr. President, if you've been telling us for some time that illegal immigration is on the decline, are you now sending those, in particular cases, the National Guard and other individuals down to the border? Well, the reason is because it's been an uptick for a couple of reasons. First of all, the economy is doing a lot better, and I think we'll continue to do better, so it's much more of a magnet than it used to be before. Number 2, of course, you have the caravan, which we just mentioned. But number 3, that is, you just passed a piece of legislation. Now, you didn't, but Congress did, that essentially prevented you from building the wall. There's money in there to refurbish it. And I recognize people in Honduras and Mexico, they probably don't pay attention a lot to Congress, but some of the people organizing them may be saying, if you don't cross now, eventually the wall will be built. But for all of those reasons, when I was looking at numbers the other day, they were talking about the number that they caught at the border at about 17,000, and I'm just looking at one border crossing, and now that number is at 50,000. So if you do an apples-to-apples comparison, many more are crossing the border now than were just even a few years ago.
And I think there may be another element here. If Democrats take over the House and or the Senate, any legislation to stop that's likely gets bogged down and doesn't go anywhere, my guess is. And so people across the border may be looking at this and saying, we can start moving now because there's a good chance that Republicans won't control both houses, and that may very well stop Donald Trump's any kind of legislation to prohibit us from coming in.
Yeah, so again, just a lot of issues on that. And again, I'll be the first to admit that a lot of people in third world countries aren't keeping track of what's going on in Congress, but some of the people that are their handlers,
that's right,
and some of the coyotes and some of these other groups, like the Without Borders kind of groups, are looking at that, and so they're making those statements. And there was some reason a while back that they were even spreading rumors that if you don't come now, President Trump's going to build the wall, and you'll never get across.
He loves having people think that, too.
So that's part of the issue as well. So we need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk for just a few minutes, if we could, about this decision to actually add a question to the short form of the census questionnaire. Of course, the question about a citizenship issue is in the long form and has been for some time, but it was removed many years ago, really to truncate the form. What about that, and what are the implications? And there are some implications in terms of medicine. There's implications in terms of the Voting Rights Act and a variety of other issues. So we'll talk about that. And then in the next hour, we're going to talk about some of the religious liberty issues that you need to know about. Andrew Hyatt will be with us, and he is the director of Paul, the Apostle of Christ, which is the new film out, and one that I thought you would like to hear from him about. So all sorts of things to cover. Our first two topics on the website, one on Scott Pruitt and the EPA, one on the dysfunctional immigration, are some topics we've addressed in case you want some facts and figures and information. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews right after this.
On the campaign trail, candidate Trump unveiled a child care proposal that included 6 weeks of guaranteed paid maternity leave. Back then, no one expected anything close to this to get through the GOP House. But, as Washington Post columnist George Will points out, limited government conservatism has become a persuasion without a party. The recently passed Tax Cuts and Jobs Act adds a new tax credit for employers that provide paid family and medical leave benefits to employees. The Family and Medical Leave Act that's been in place for 25 years provides certain job protections for people taking leave, but no requirement that this be paid leave. George Will points out that even many conservatives support paid family leave in the name of family values, and because free stuff polls well. But someone will pay for this. George Will titles his column on this issue, "Paid Maternity Leave? Your Baby Will Get the Bill." He writes, the debate will concern ways to disguise the benefit's cost while requiring others to pay for it. One proposal is to pay for family leave through unemployment insurance. This would involve a new tax or an expanded payroll tax. Another idea is to allow new parents, moms and dads, to collect a few weeks of Social Security payments while agreeing to have that amount chopped off of what they get when they're eligible. A risky proposition on several levels. What happened to the expectation that somebody in the household works so the family can support this child? Is this now retrograde, wonders George Will. Some companies provide paid family leave for female employees and even male employees. It's their choice, and a good way to attract young workers. But the left seeks to mandate this, temporarily settling for incentives like this tax credit. We need to think long and hard before adding another entitlement to the list being funded by trillion-dollar deficits. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us today. And let's again kind of go back to the Constitution. The Constitution mandates that every 10 years, Americans will be surveyed and there will be a census. And, of course, for more than a century now, the Commerce Secretaries had discretion over what questions can be on that census and what questions census takers can ask. And for most administrations, that'd be the end of it. But, of course, we have Donald Trump as the president, and even this is controversial. Justice Department asked the census officials to include a question about citizenship so they can better enforce the Voting Rights Act, because, after all, theoretically, only citizens vote. And so if you're going to even allow people to gerrymander districts and make sure that you have some that are favorable to different ethnic minorities, you have to know who is a citizen and who is not. Dr. Merrill Matthews, that is just not that complicated, but we've been hearing from the attorneys general in California and New York that this is an example. Yes, suing. This is an example of racism and all sorts of problems, and this will cause an undercount. And nobody said that they would not count the people who are here illegally. During the Civil War, we counted slaves, right? So how could you ever say we wouldn't count people that are here illegal? So talk about this.
They did count people who were here illegally up through 1950. Yeah. In 1960, they changed that in part, as I understand, because they were just trying to get the form a little shorter, the long form. Mm-hmm. But they continued, and they do. The Census Bureau does regular sorts of surveys out there, much shorter surveys, and on that they do ask a citizenship question.
Yes, they do.
And for your listeners, if you're not involved in the public policy world, it's hard to understand how much we rely on census data.
Oh, sure.
For all kinds of things that deal with welfare, health insurance, government grants, and so forth, education. It's massive of what the government relies on. The Census Bureau, both its decennial survey and the more frequent surveys that it takes for being able to make certain types of decisions out there. So it's very important. And all they're doing is saying, well, we do this on the shorter surveys that are taken more frequently, but that also only goes to roughly 3.5% of the population when they do it. It would be good to do it on the full census. And there's nothing controversial about it except it's Donald Trump.
Well, some of the excuses they're making and their reasons for suing are because they're worried about their funding for
That's
various
exactly
things.
right.
But the thing is,
funding and power.
You know, I mean, I think that the left relies on a sort of nebulous idea of how many illegal immigrants we have in the country.
Yeah, 11 million is the number we always hear.
They don't like the public to know how much is being spent on services for them. Mm-hmm. But we need to know that in order to plan. I mean, states that have a huge population of poor illegals that they have to take care of, you know, it's important to actually have the numbers to be accurate so that funding can be taken care of. But they don't want this known. They don't want the public to know how much of our taxpayer money is being spent on these people. So I think they're relying on a little bit of, fuzziness here. And so when they see this census, the major census that is being done, I mean, the other counts are one thing, but when they see this being done, it just threatens them and bothers them. And, you know, when you think about congressional representation, because that's been another one of the arguments, I mean, that's because of citizens. Mm-hmm. I mean, you count citizens to decide congressional districts, so it shouldn't affect that at all.
Let me just mention, too, that we have a link to IPI.org, the third article there, One Good Reason to Ask a Citizenship Question on the 2020 Census by Dr. Merrill Matthews. What is that one good reason?
The uninsured. When they track the uninsured, they do not ask whether or not they have, whether or not they're citizens. So the number of uninsured has always included virtually all of the people who are here illegally. And that makes the number look much bigger because none of the programs that they're talking about doing, unless you're just a single-payer person who says anybody who walks in gets free care, would actually include illegal aliens. They wouldn't get subsidies and other things. And so if it's 9, 10, 11 million, something like that, almost all of them are uninsured. And so it makes the number of uninsured look significantly larger, which then creates more pressure. Look how many we've got who are uninsured out there. And under no system, even of the Affordable Care Act, Barack Obama went and said, nobody who's illegal is going to be able to get these subsidies and so forth. But they used a larger number, even though there was no chance you were going to be able to actually have a major impact on the larger number.
There you go. You know, Penna, you talked about another one, this idea of undercount or maybe not getting all the funding. And the argument that came from the attorneys general at least in California and New York, but especially California, was that, well, this is going to hurt the blue states. But I looked it up and we found some articles here about how this could affect the red states because a lot of the red states have more people that are here illegally. Take these towns, McAllen, Texas, Yuma, Arizona, Gainesville, Georgia, they all have more than 10% of their population are undocumented. So that argument doesn't work very well. And there is, I think, a reasonable concern about, well, if you ask a citizenship question, will fewer individuals answer the question? And on the long form, that hasn't been a big issue. But this is, of course, now going on the short form that everybody would fill out. But they've had a problem for some time in trying to get people who are here illegally to fill out even that form with all sorts of massive outreach programs. So this might make it slightly worse, but the problem existed long before we asked the citizenship question, right?
It did. And to Penna's point about the services and so forth, they will come up and say, well, you can't have welfare. You're not on you won't get welfare if you are here illegally. You won't be able to get subsidies for health insurance. But if you show up to a public hospital and you don't have money, they will treat you. Yes. And there's a federal money that goes to hospitals that treat what we call a disproportionate share of the uninsured. It's called DISH payments. The hospitals will be reimbursed with federal taxpayer money because they're doing that. If you have a child who was born here and is low income, that child may qualify for welfare. The parents may not, but the parents manage the money for the child, and they're able to go out and buy the food for it and so forth. So there's an education. If you show up in a district, Supreme Court, you've got to provide education for that person, and that person is subsidized by primarily by state, but could be some federal money in there, especially for the low-income meals that are offered for breakfast and lunch for low-income kids.
Well, and again, one other issue that a lot of people pointed out is this is not an issue that I'd fight for, but the fact that the liberals are screaming so much that maybe makes me think maybe we should fight for it more. And part of that is, do we really have just 11 million illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants, whatever phrase you want to use in America? We've been using that same number for a long time.
A lot of people question that number.
And maybe it's 20 million. Of course, we posted an article here by Ann Coulter. She thinks it's 40 million. And what if we found out it really was? Then we would really understand how a lot of our disproportionate funds are spent on things like education, healthcare, and the rest. So that's worth knowing. But as we take a break, one of the things we always hear from the liberals is, why can't we be like other countries? We're one of the few countries that doesn't have the metric system. And why can't we have more gun control like other countries? Well, what about the surveys? Do they ask questions about citizenship? Oh, yeah, like Australia, the United Kingdom. There's a long list of other countries that we're always told by progressives that we should be like. Well, they do ask a citizenship question, but again, as I think Dr. Merrill Matthews and Penna, you said, only so well. It would only be controversial if this individual called for it. If Barack Obama had called for it, it might have been controversial, but it's really controversial because of Donald Trump. Let's take a break. We come back. We have some things to talk about today. One of those is a really very positive piece of information about a colonel in the Air Force in terms of religious liberty. A little bit later, we're going to be talking to the director of Paul, the Apostle of Christ. And then we have a lot more to cover, trade, and what about tax increases, the upcoming election? Lots to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you would like to join our conversation today at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews with us. He is the resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, IPI.org. And Penna Dexter, we don't have Kelly Shackelford with us, but you're going to sit in for us because we always like to spend at least a segment talking about religious liberty. And I think some of our listeners might remember that we had a colonel, his name was Leland Bohannon, who had some reservations about signing a spousal appreciation document. And we now have some very good news, don't we?
Yeah, we do have good news. I'll try to explain it. I know I can't do the Kelly job, but I am a fan of First Liberty Institute. So, and so happy to see this development that surfaced this weekend. It was kind of unexpected that it would happen this way. But this Colonel Leland Bohannon, until 2017, he was a rising star in the Air Force. He'd been in the Air Force for 24 years. He actually had a recommendation pending for promotion to one-star general. And then last May, the position that he was in required that he sign, or at least presented the opportunity to sign, a spouse appreciation certificate for someone retiring from the Air Force. And of course, this particular person retiring had a same-sex spouse. And he, because of his faith, did not feel that he could sign that certificate. So what he did was he asked for an exemption, an accommodation from that. They refused. But he did get somebody higher than him, a superior, to sign that. But that wasn't good enough. And so there was an offense complaint filed. And it was filed with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And, of course, what does the EEOC do? They ruled against him. And so he was relieved of his command. He was also, his promotion was halted. That was gone. And First Liberty Institute took that case. So it was just pretty much going to ruin his career in the military. 8 Republican senators wrote the new Air Force Secretary, Heather Wilson, and asked the Air Force to rescind this decision. And it's been months and months, almost a year. A lengthy review, but guess what? They actually did the right thing. They rescinded that decision. He's reinstated into the Air Force. The left says that this, of course, they're very upset about that. That this reinforces discrimination in the Air Force, in the military. It does not. It does what the Trump administration has done in many ways. It reinforces conscience rights in the military. And ever since the Obergefell decision, this has been the battle. Yes. I mean, they got marriage. They were able to get it. So even in the opinion, Justice Kennedy said that people's rights who believed that marriage was between a man and a woman would be protected. But this has been a battle ever since, and especially in the military. So it was really good to see this. And, to be clear, he did ask for a religious accommodation. He didn't get that. But now I think this may set a precedent for people to get religious accommodations when they don't agree on these LGBT issues.
And again, if you don't know who Colonel Bohannon is, of course, we have some links, as we always do, to First Liberty. And here's a man that got a Bronze Star out of Afghanistan. Here's a man who was almost a brigadier general, which would mean he would be a one-star general. And so he's not a troublemaker. He was on a good career path, and he recognized that still there might be a desire to get that spousal appreciation document. So he goes to a 2-star general, which I would say, if I'm the spouse of this individual, a 2-star general writing that spousal appreciation would be enough. But again, if your goal is to go and attack any kind of Christian who doesn't bow the knee to same-sex marriage, then that was not enough, even though he tried to come up with everything from an accommodation to actually get a more senior-level officer to actually sign the document. That still is something that I'm glad we finally resolved, but it's sad that it took so long.
Yeah, this is why the groups like First Liberty are important, because we have to get these things settled in the military. And since we had a transition in administrations and Air Force secretaries, you know, you've got people left over with a different mindset. And so, you know, I'm hoping that enough precedent can be set over time throughout the Trump administration that there won't be questions and issues like this. The people that serve our country do not deserve to be attacked in this way.
Dr. Merrill Matthews, you know, this illustrates a point that you and I and Penna and everybody else makes, and that is elections have consequences. This Air Force secretary has a different philosophy and was more accommodating than the previous ones. And if the individual right now who was the president of the United States and the individual who was over all the armed forces, as was Hillary Clinton, I think we might have had a different outcome.
We would have had a different outcome. And as you say, elections have consequences. And it is what had happened among a number of these agencies and departments and so forth was that they were pushing an agenda. It wasn't just asking what is the law, what should we. They were pushing an agenda to try to make a statement. That was true in the Education Department, true in the Civil Rights Commission and others, to try to make a statement about transgender and homosexual people, and that's been scaled back a good bit now.
Well, Penna, you were also at the First Liberty banquet, the luncheon, and there are some other issues. One that it'd be a very important prayer target is that cross in Maryland, right? Mm-hmm. So talk about that for just a minute.
Yeah, First Liberty had its Dallas luncheon, and of course it was sort of launched many years ago in Dallas. So there are a lot of people that just love and support the ministry. But there were Kelly spoke, and he did a great job talking about 6 cases that could very well be taken up by the Supreme Court. That are First Liberty's cases. He said the most that any that they've ever had in the past is 1 case at a time.
Yes.
There are 6 now. I mean, our listeners are, if you listen at all on Fridays, you're pretty familiar. But there's the Coach Kennedy case, praying after the football game. If the ruling out of the Ninth Circuit was if you could be seen praying, then it's unconstitutional. The Bladenburg Cross, which you mentioned, Kerby, which is a huge cross in Maryland, and it was World War I moms of those who lost their lives in World War I built the cross. It's been there since then. And it's being threatened by the American Humanist Society. And right now, it's looking bad for the cross, that it could be torn down. One comment that was made in the hearings in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals was, well, we'll solve the problem by cutting the arms off the cross. I mean, come on. So in that court district, that's where the Arlington National Cemetery is. You could see crosses threatened all over the place if this goes the wrong way. So that's another one. There's another case about a woman being challenged for praying in her own home by police officers. Mm-hmm. There's another 2 cases that are parallel. They both went different ways about prayer before a legislative or city body. Mm-hmm. Can the city, whatever, mayor or whoever, hold prayer or have other people coming in to pray? And then there's one about, can a city ban all Christian schools from the city? So these are all cases that could go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Pretty interesting.
Again, we always have the link to First Liberty. We encourage you to pray about those. When we come back, we're going to talk with the director of the new film, Paul, the Apostle of Christ.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager stirred up some controversy by saying something progressives would never let you say. As a Jew, he says that American Jews are the luckiest Jews in Jewish history. He also says that about many other ethnic groups. As I've mentioned in a previous commentary, his father wrote his senior thesis on anti-Semitism in America. Nevertheless, he taught his two sons that they were the luckiest Jews in Jewish history. Dennis Prager still believes that, even though he has written a book about anti-Semitism and taught Jewish history at Brooklyn College. He reminds us that many more Israeli Jews have moved to America than American Jews have moved to Israel. That's not a reflection on Israel, but a reflection on how good it is for Jews to live in America. He then moves on to black Americans. Despite the existence of racism in America, he also makes the case that black Americans are among the luckiest blacks in the world. He even quotes from Keith Richburg, a distinguished black journalist who admits that though his ancestors were brought here on slave ships, he was grateful to be an American when he saw the present-day horrors of Africa. In a moment of candor, he revealed, "I thank God my ancestor made that voyage." What about people from Latin America? Dennis Prager comes to the same conclusion. They are among the luckiest Latinos in the world. How could they or anyone else deny the fact that millions of Latin Americans have been willing to leave their family, their friends, their culture, and their language to come to America? And we know that there are tens of millions more who desire to do the same. Of course, there are many in this country that claim America is the source of evil. They claim that racism and bigotry are alive. They ignore the good of America and focus only on what is wrong. But they may not admit it, but they also are some of the luckiest people in the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and we will get back to some of the news items in just a minute. But one of the things we do so often, Penna, as you well know, is we like to feature these faith-based films. And whether we've had the Kendrick brothers on, the Irwin brothers on, or a number of others, Pure Flicks, and all sorts of other places, we have tried to really encourage you to go to Christian-based films. A film that I've been to, and I encourage my entire Sunday school class to go to, was Paul, the Apostle of Christ. And so we thought it would be good for you to have a chance to hear from both the writer and the director, and his name is Andrew Hyatt. He's an award-winning writer and director. For example, Full of Grace, The Last Light, The Frozen would be a good example of some of the films that he's been involved with. A graduate of Loyola Marymount University. And you might also, Penna, we were talking just off air about the stoning of Soroya M. You've had a chance to see that, and that was one that he was instrumental in developing and producing. But this film really helps you understand, I think, the Christian message, because you have Paul imprisoned during the Neronian persecution. Luke comes to meet him, and in a sense, it's like writing the book of Acts, and it's just very well done. And so, Andrew Hyatt, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, first of all, we have encouraged people already to attend this film. We've been playing some little clips about it, but I would imagine there are probably a few of our listeners that even are maybe just joining us today, because we get probably more people listening on our Friday weekend edition than any other time, who say, I didn't even know that film was out there. Can you give us a little bit of a background?
Sure, yeah. Well, we're humbled and blessed to bring Paul's story to the big screen for the first time theatrically.
And, this film's been a kind of a labor of love for, I'd say, the last 2 years. Something that God really put on my heart to really share this story. It's something very personal to me as well. I grew up in the church, but did what a lot of young people do. And when I hit college, I sort of looked at my faith tradition, if you will, and said, well, I don't know that this has anything relevant to say to my life. And so I walked away for about 7 years and then had a major reconversion, very similar to a Damascus Road type experience. And since that moment, I've kind of been, God's put it on my heart to tell these stories. So it's been a gift, and here we are partnering with a major studio, Sony Pictures and Affirmed Films. This is the same studio that's done probably a lot of the films that you've talked about on your show, War Room and Risen and Fireproof and these kind of films. So we've been out for 2 weeks, and it's just been an incredible audience response.
Let's, if we can, talk about what it took to create Rome, because this is one of the things I found which was so gritty and realistic. We've got to get out of our mind, let's be honest, some of those Christian films in the past that, can I use the word cheesy or poorly done or bad production values or whatever that go, well, I don't think it was quite that way. This really took me into the world of Rome under Emperor Nero and the kind of dangers that any Christian living in Rome would have faced at that time. That took some work in terms of building sets and the rest. True?
Very true. I appreciate you saying that. One of the main concerns we had was to really root this story in a historical, authentic way, so that you're totally right. There was no moments where the audience would roll their eyes and say, okay, that was pretty bad. So we really went to great lengths, and, our budget was so small. We were only on a $5 million budget, but we had this fantastic production designer out of Scotland. I'll mention Dave Aerosmith, who was such an obsessive scholar of Rome and wanted every detail to be right. And one thing we talked about earlier is putting the audience really inside of Rome. So sometimes in the bigger studio movies, if you think of Gladiator and Ben-Hur and these kind of things, you get this sort of amazing epic scope. Whereas we really wanted to kind of give a real point of view of somebody living and breathing in Rome, what it would have felt like to walk the streets and to turn corners and to see things. And I think Dave did a phenomenal job.
What about your actors? Where did you find them?
We had a great casting director, Patricia DeSerto, out of New York. And, it was amazing. We have such a professional, amazing cast, again, talking about Christian films. And sometimes there's a hesitancy for, I think, major actors to get involved. And to have Jim Caviezel, of course, from Passion of the Christ, and James Faulkner, who's just a super professional, 40 years plus in the business, and Joanne Whaley and John Lynch. It was a gift to be able to work with such professionals.
Well, and again, that Jim Caviezel, in case people have not seen it, plays Luke, and that really is helpful because, in a sense, then he wants to write the story, which, of course, really essentially becomes the book of Acts, and he's got Aquila and Priscilla, which, of course, you meet in Acts, was it 18? And then, of course, you also know about them from 1 Corinthians. And so you have a sense in which it's not just Paul, but they are telling the story of Paul. So then there's the flashbacks and those things which give you a little bit of a sense of the first century Christianity. And a lot of people know the story about Jesus. I would have to say that a lot of our listeners, Andrew, don't know as much about how we went from Jesus to the disciples to the explosion of Christianity in the Roman world.
It's a wonderful point, and I think a great thing that the film educates and inspires is just how the first century Christian community lived. And that was one thing we talked early on about doing an A to Z Paul movie. Let's just hit all the big beats and take him through his life. But the more that we discussed with people and really kind of prayed and thought about it, we wanted to bring Paul into a world where it was actually Paul inspiring and encouraging others, so that you got to see how really Paul's life and his experience could really affect early Christianity, but also, of course, us in modern day, as we still read his letters and still hear his amazing story. And so being able to bring this first century Christian community alive in a really authentic way is something that I think a lot of people are really responding to, because you're right, we haven't seen it and we don't think about it much.
Andrew, this is Merrill Matthews. I just don't know enough about the film industry to know how this works, but you're doing an overtly Christian film. What about the cast and crew? Do only Christians want to come and work on this? You wouldn't have to necessarily be a Christian to be a good actor on it. Do you look or do you try to reach out to Christians to do this, or how does that work?
You know, one thing we really believe in, and it's something that the producers as well from ODB Films, Eric Groth and TJ Burden, who were instrumental in putting the film together, is really starting the gospel sharing process from the ground up. And that means the cast and the crew, we make no restrictions. We make no sort of, hey, you got to come from a church or you have to be Christian. And so typically, you know, on a film like this, we had about 300 plus crew. And I would venture to say that 99% were not believers, were not Christian, and same with the cast. But one of the more beautiful things is when you see people's response to the gospel and their response to being a part of this story, and the amount of times the conversation rises where, you know, somebody on the crew will come up and say, whoa, did this really happen? Did this guy really exist? And you say, yeah, it's amazing, huh? And what an opportunity to share the gospel with people that may not normally walk into a church or be open to hearing the gospel.
This is Penna again. I haven't seen it yet, but where does it start? I mean, because I think the story of the other disciples and their reaction to Paul, who was the greatest persecutor of Christians, and then having his Damascus Road experience. So does it start before that?
The way that we weave the story, Paul's story in is I think, very unique and really making people really enjoy kind of how we bring it to life, which is we do start at the very end of his life. He's in Rome. He's in prison, and this is a moment where he's already been tried and convicted by Nero, and he's essentially awaiting his death. And then as Luke sneaks in, it offers us this opportunity that as the current, you know, Christians are struggling in Rome, and there's this big question of, do we stay in Rome and face persecution, knowing that we are helping so many people? You know, this is a time when the Roman culture was not interested in widows, orphans. You know, you were in big trouble if you didn't have a means. And so all of a sudden, this group coming in, taking care of the widows and orphans, taking care of people under extreme persecution. So there's this major question of, do we stay and continue the work, or do we leave Rome and start again elsewhere and maybe do more good? It's a tough conflict, you know, something that probably a lot of our brothers and sisters around the world are facing today. And so Paul's life, then we were able to weave in sort of these stories, the Damascus Road, the persecution of Christians, how he got to where he got by just being able to live it and experience it through the first century church learning about it.
Very good. Let's take a break. When we come back, let me give you a chance if you would like to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you've seen the film and have a comment or a question. We also have a link to paulmovie.com, and we're going to talk about that after the break and how you can obviously get group tickets, some things you can do to help promote it, and all the things that we do so often. So Andrew Hyatt with us for just a few more minutes. But if you'd like to join us and want to talk about the movie, we certainly welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merle Matthews, in studio. We'll be right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to talk just for another couple of minutes here about Paul, Apostle of Christ. It is the film. We'll get back to some of the issues in the news. Of course, we've been talking about everything from immigration. Penna Dexter's commentary today on paid maternity leave. Some very important articles that we've posted on everything from Scott Pruitt to China and trade. Also, the argument from Nancy Pelosi that if Democrats win, we're going to roll back the clock by repealing the new laws and massively try to increase taxes. So we have a lot to talk about. But Scott, let me talk about, well, first of all, let me talk about this issue of how to promote this, because that's our next caller. And that is, we have a trailer for about 2.5 minutes. And so one of the things, Andrew, we encourage our listeners to do is to watch the trailer, because that'll give you an idea about the film. And then there's a share button there, and then post it on your Facebook page or send it to someone. And so that's one way you can promote it. And as they go to the website that we have on our link there, paulmovie.com, there's a place for group tickets. So talk about the importance of getting people in the seats so that we can send a signal to not only Sony but Hollywood that we want more of these kinds of films.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, the only reason they keep making these is because they do well at the box office, you know. Not to be so crude as to simplify it like that, but it's the truth. So yes. Really, you know, if this is something that, you know, listen, we're trying to make these films to just help people. We're trying to draw people deeper into their faith, bring up some important challenges and issues, and it's helping people, and it's doing a great thing. So, you know, support us. Go to the movie, and the most important thing is to go today, tomorrow, this weekend, you know, instead of saying, hey, you know, I'll get that on DVD. The best thing you can do is go out to the theater, bring some friends, and experience it as a community, and that will send the biggest message.
Let's take some phone calls along the way. Listening on the local Dallas station, KBDT in Texas. Jason, thank you for calling today.
Great show. You know, Hollywood at one point had a tremendous tradition, all the way back to silent movies, of having these epic films. D.W. Griffith, all the way forward to Cecil B. DeMille and The Robe, Quo Vadis, things like that. And, you know, they were able to walk that line between entertainment and historical. So how are we doing on this one? What are we doing, if anything, in that type of tradition?
Yeah, I think you'll if you like those films, I think you'll really respond to this one. I think that this is finally something that scripturally is accurate, the heart of the movie is accurate, and historically it's completely on point. So I do think that there is hopefully a push now to bring more of these to the screen. But again, at this point, you know, day and age, it's all about the business and the bottom line. And if the studio sees that they can make money off of these, I promise you they'll keep making them.
Well, and again, I think anybody that is not necessarily a student of the Bible just think that it was a story made up. But if you've read through the book of Acts, and I just mentioned a minute ago, you see Paul meeting Aquila and Priscilla in Corinth. Well, then you see Paul with Aquila and Priscilla and Luke in Rome, and then eventually they decide finally to leave. The stories about the road to Damascus and his conversion, and then the reality that this happened during the Neronian persecution from about, AD 64 to, I think, when the film's set in AD 67. You're historically accurate from start to finish, and you're biblically accurate from start to finish. And there are times when Paul, writing to or telling Luke to write it down, will actually give you verses from Philippians, I think I counted, Galatians, a variety of other places, the book of Romans. And so for a person that's historically and biblically literate, they're probably going to enjoy this film more than a person that just goes to watch it, don't you think?
I agree, you know, and we went to great lengths to make sure that you know, these things were accurate. A lot of research was put into the film, and we had an amazing team of pastors, priests, even a few rabbis that were supporting us to really make sure that we just stayed right on point with all of it.
Andrew, how long did it take you to make the film from sort of concept to the finished product? And you mentioned that you had a limited budget. Was that because you couldn't raise more money? Was there just some kind of cap put on that and said, if you can make it for this, that's fine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say probably all in, we're looking at 2 years from concept into release, which actually is a fairly short time in the scope of film. But and the budget, it really came out of just it's a risk. It's a studio risk. We didn't raise any of the money. It's Sony Pictures, Firm Films financed the film, and it's really just they kind of look at what's done before, their films before, and kind of the budget range that they're comfortable in. And we knew that we could create something very beautiful and very artistic and excellent for this amount. So they said, go for it.
And you came in under budget? Or on budget?
Right on budget. we are right there. I don't think they'd have anything different.
That is good. Let's take another phone call. We'll head up to the state of Michigan this time, WLJN. Deb, I think you've seen the movie. Tell us more.
Yes. I went about a week ago and just thought it was fabulous. The acting was just incredible, and of so many, and just all of the parts they covered. And it was not like a feel happy film where you leave and that was so great, but it was so great. It was
sobering,
really
though, too.
Made you think it was such a very sobering. It was such a dark time in our history, and I don't know. It just enriched. It's just enriched Scripture, and Paul quoted Scripture, and I mean, I'm not saying others didn't, but it was just so well done, and I just thank you for doing that. It just was incredible. I'm telling everybody to go, and thank you for, thank you for making that.
Andrew, is it one of those things where the word of mouth is causing it to grow over the last 2 weeks since it's been out?
Yeah, we've had just an incredible audience response. The critical response from the industry, Variety and Hollywood Reporter wasn't positive, which is expected.
What did we expect?
Then, of course, the massive contrast of the audience response, which has been, one of the best responses to a film so far this year. And I love what she just said, which is, I'm not interested in making films that are just inspirational, faith-based inspirational, that make you just sleep well at night. I mean, our faith is deep and it's rich and it's challenging and it's raw, and hopefully this film kind of helps us, especially in America, where we don't really face persecution on a real scale that the first century community did, and around the world they are. We can go to church on Sunday and open our Bibles anytime, and maybe the worst thing at the moment is we get a bad Facebook message or something. And so I just, it's hopefully helpful to just go deeper in your faith and challenge some things and make you think about things.
Well, I think just to appreciate those who have come before us in the faith, that's really something that we as Christians should be doing. And I think when you see it, you can read the Bible, but when you see it on the screen, it becomes more real, doesn't it?
The visual medium is an incredible tool to bring it to life. I agree, and we're grateful to be able to now make films that, we've had so many negative films in this culture that kind of go against this. So it really is hopefully something that you can, go deeper. And also, one thing we talk a lot about is bringing your kids. It's PG-13, but, your 13-year-old, your 15-year-old, and introduce them to these incredible individuals. And I guarantee you they're going to see a very, very new perspective that they've not thought about before.
You did bring up something I wanted to close with, and that is it is PG-13, so don't bring the younger kids. And let's face it, it is talking about a time in which Nero set afire Christians like street lamps, and so you do have that visual image there, so that's something to be aware of. But at the same time, I think it will remind you of what it was like to be a Christian in Rome during the Neronian persecution. It will help you understand how the gospel went forth, how the Bible was written, and how it was, and even there you see them making multiple copies of what Luke puts together, and you begin to see how the gospel and the Bible itself spread. So lots of great material, but again, it is a PG-13 film, and so be aware of that as well. But Andrew, appreciate the work that you've done on other films. You knocked it out of the park on this one, and we look forward to the next time we can get you on the program with us again.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for supporting the film.
Well, again, you have information on the website right now at pointofview.net in which you can find out a little bit more. Just click on the picture there of Andrew Hyatt, who is the writer and director, or simply go to paulmovie.com, and you can actually enter in your zip code. It will help you find a theater. You can watch the trailer. My assignment to you is to watch the trailer. It's about 2.5 minutes long. And then share it with somebody. Send it to your pastor. Send it to your Sunday school leader. Put it on your Facebook page. And then buy a ticket. And as a matter of fact, there's a place for group ticket info. And as I do so often, we get our Sunday school class to go and support these Christian films. When we come back, we're going to talk about some other issues. Matter of fact, those of you listening online will hear the commentary by Penna Dexter on paid maternity leave. We'll get into that and all sorts of other issues with Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. So if you'd like to join the conversation, again, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get back to some of the issues in the news right after these important messages.
On the campaign trail, candidate Trump unveiled a child care proposal that included 6 weeks of guaranteed paid maternity leave. Back then, no one expected anything close to this to get through the GOP House. But, as Washington Post columnist George Will points out, limited government conservatism has become a persuasion without a party. The recently passed Tax Cuts and Jobs Act adds a new tax credit for employers that provide paid family and medical leave benefits to employees. The Family and Medical Leave Act that's been in place for 25 years provides certain job protections for people taking leave, but no requirement that this be paid leave. George Will points out that even many conservatives support paid family leave in the name of family values, and because free stuff polls well. But someone will pay for this. George Will titles his column on this issue, Paid Maternity Leave? Your Baby Will Get the Bill. He writes, the debate will concern ways to disguise the benefits cost while requiring others to pay for it. One proposal is to pay for family leave through unemployment insurance. This would involve a new tax or an expanded payroll tax. Another idea is to allow new parents, moms and dads, to collect a few weeks of Social Security payments while agreeing to have that amount chopped off of what they get when they're eligible. A risky proposition on several levels. What happened to the expectation that somebody in the household works so the family can support this child? Is this now retrograde, wonders George Will? Some companies provide paid family leave for female employees and even male employees. It's their choice, and a good way to attract young workers. But the left seeks to mandate this, temporarily settling for incentives like this tax credit. We need to think long and hard before adding another entitlement to the list being funded by trillion-dollar deficits. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is a weekend edition. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We will certainly cover a lot of issues in the third segment here, the last hour and all of that. But before we get into some of these other issues, if you listen online, you will hear Penna Dexter's commentary, and it is entitled Paid Maternity Leave. And that is an issue, Penna, we've talked about with you before. But George Will wrote a column, and you kind of picked up on it to remind us there's a price to pay for some of these government entitlements, isn't there?
Absolutely. And so his title, Paid Maternity Leave, Your Baby Will Get the Bill. And, it's true.
That's true.
It is just true.
Yes.
And I remember during the campaign when Trump was talking about all the different things that, he was running on. And then, it was kind of like Ivanka's opinion or thoughts about an issue kind of came in there and took it a little bit to big government leftist positions. And, there was a whole child care proposal that was unveiled during the campaign. Some people called it Ivanka care. Mm-hmm. And, I'm just like going, oh, great, just what we need. Because what it does is really creates another entitlement.
Yes.
And, I've watched my children have babies, and some of the husbands get a couple weeks off in some of these companies. And, they get to stay home along with the wife. And if a company wants to provide that, fine. But the federal government should not be requiring companies to provide it, and the federal government should not be providing for it in any way. But this is in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There is a new tax credit for employers that provide paid family and medical leave benefits to employees. And it kind of adds to what we already have, which is your job is protected if you take maternity leave, but it's not paid for.
It's not paid.
You're not paid. And, it's a great benefit. But as I said, this is up to a company. If they want to attract people, fine. We do not have any business creating another entitlement when we are already dealing with these $1 trillion deficits.
Yes.
And so your child will pay for it. They've got lots of crazy ways to pay for it. One of them is, well, just take some of your Social Security now and cut it off from when you're old.
That was just nuts.
That's the Marco Rubio.
Yeah. Social Security is already, kind of rickety. So we don't need to be doing things like that. Another thing was through the unemployment insurance system. But all of these ideas, they're just big government entitlement, nanny state ideas, and we have no business adding any more of those to what we've already got.
Let me just mention, too, if you would like to get this, so certainly what we always encourage you to do is to sign up to get the Viewpoints commentaries. You get mine in your inbox Monday through Friday, and Penna's, which we're talking about today, will come to your inbox tomorrow on Saturday, so you can sign up and receive that. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, if there's anything I've heard you write about more than once, it's the fact that we have these unfunded mandates, these unfunded entitlements, and this becomes just one more. And the person that I guess ends up funding it is the baby that you're actually getting paid maternity leave for.
Depending upon how they'll ultimately do it. If they're doing a tax credit, then yes, it is. In some cases, I would have thought where they were going to go is what they did with minimum wage, which is to say you have to raise the minimum wage, but the employers bear the cost on that.
Right.
It still becomes an entitlement. It still becomes a cost of business. But you don't add to the federal debt by doing that part. So, but I don't know that we're on a push for this. And here's the amazing thing. If we had entitlement programs out there that we said, these are fiscally responsible, they're sound, we just need to follow this kind of approach and we'll be able to do it. But all of our entitlement programs are a mess financially.
Yes.
And getting worse. And we just have never figured out how to do it. And the problem is elected officials will come up and say, we have a way to do this and to make it actuarially sound. If indeed that is the case, they always expand the program or do other things which destroys the actuarial soundness. So you just can't trust them to be fiscally responsible on this.
And again, this is a healthcare expert talking about how you've watched all the other entitlements. Penna, one of the things I said earlier in the week, because it came up, and again, if you have some comments about paid maternity leave, we'd love to hear your comments, is that even if you believe that maternity leave is a good idea, why can't you let the companies work it out? or even let the states work it out that have the so-called laboratories of democracy. But when you have the federal government, you know as well as I do that they will have certain rules about what qualifies for leave or what does not, whether it's for 6 weeks or 12 weeks. You know, I think the Republicans are talking about 6 weeks. The Democrats are talking about 12 weeks. And so George Will jokingly said, so they'll end up with a compromise 18 weeks.
Right. Exactly right.
And so the point is that even if you believe that maternity leave is a good idea, as soon as the government gets involved, all those rules are going to even make it worse, right?
Yes. And I mean, just think of it from the point of view of a company, a small business, I think is probably the best way to think of it, who has a few employees who already with the idea of maternity leave they're going to have to make some big adjustments when this person's going to be out for 3 months. And they're not going to have this person. They don't have extra people sitting around to do that job. So they have to make that adjustment. But now, under this, they've got to pay the person too.
Yeah.
They've got to pay the person that's not there. And, you know, a lot of these companies operate on small margins. So, you know, that's been recognized in the Jobs Act that's going to be hard on businesses. So so there'll be a tax credit. So guess who pays for it?
Yeah.
We do. And our kids, the baby.
I want to get your comment, too, as a woman, because I said this, and maybe I'm wrong, so you can clarify it if I'm wrong, that if I am interviewing a single man and then I'm talking about also a woman who's married who I think might have a child, and they have comparable qualifications, I'd be more inclined to hire what? A man.
Of course.
Doesn't that make sense? Because if I think I'm going to have to pay your maternity leave for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 18 weeks, put in the number, he's going to be less expensive, right? So that's
Absolutely.
another issue, isn't it?
That's a big issue. And, you know, I mean, we have a small business, and, I mean, we have creative ways of employing women with little children in our company. We've just been committed to that. And I think there are a lot of creative people out there, and you can do it with just technology that we have now. So, you know, let the American people figure these family issues out. I mean, it's just what happened to the idea of a family being responsible for figuring out how they're going to deal with having their own children? The government is not responsible to pay for you to have your baby. And it's the minute we start requiring companies to do these things, we start hamstringing them, hurting them, and we actually put a clamp on the economy.
Let's take a break, and when we come back in the last hour, we're going to spend some time getting into a lot of these very important issues. Certainly one of those is Scott Pruitt. We've certainly had some controversy surrounding him. Of course, the issue of immigration. If you go to ipi.org, you will see a number of very good articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews. He's got one good reason to ask a citizenship question on the 2020 census. Also posted some articles here in which Nancy Pelosi says, you know, if the Democrats win, we're going to turn back the clock by repealing the new law and massively increasing taxes. Yesterday, we spent some time talking about trade in China and South Korea. So we've got a lot of things to cover in this last hour. So if you'd like to join us on any of those topics, we certainly do recommend that you give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Do that during the break, and we'll give you first preference when we come back. Of course, you can also watch us on the YouTube channel. Some of you are leaving some comments there. I'll try to read some of those as well for our panel, which includes, again, Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. Go to ipi.org and read any of his commentaries. And you know, so often on my commentaries, I'm quoting his commentaries because he's done such a great job of research. And if you'd like to get Penna Dexter's commentary, don't forget you can sign up for our Viewpoints commentary, and it will land in your inbox tomorrow. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute. And if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151. Or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Last hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Haven't gotten into some of the issues in the news as much, so we are going to cover that this hour. Scott Pruitt, who is the individual who is the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, come under fire. We'll talk about why that is taking place. That's our first article. We have one on dysfunctional immigration, so we'll get a little bit into that as well. One of our articles about China trade and retaliation. The stock market hasn't done so well today in response to some of the things the president had said about that. And Nancy Pelosi just assures us that if Democrats win, she says we're going to turn back the clock by repealing the new law and increasing taxes. Oh, yeah, that's really going to work well in this next election. Penna, what's your thoughts about that one before we get to some of these others? I have never heard individuals announce that they're going to increase taxes before they even are elected to office. That's probably something that some of her fellow Democrats wish she hadn't said, right?
I don't think she's as strategically minded as some other politicians. And, you know, as she ages, I think it gets a little bit worse. That's not smart. Especially when you hear all the good results that have been coming to various companies across the country.
I think there was one. I believe I remember Walter Mondale before he was elected.
That could be.
And I think it was in the Democratic convention. He said,
1984?
Ronald Reagan will raise your taxes. He won't tell you. I just did.
And how'd that work out for him?
And he won one state, his home state, right? Minnesota. That was landslide, if I remember right. 49 states going for the president, Ronald Reagan. I don't think it worked out so well. So anyway, we'll get into that. What about this idea of Scott Pruitt? For some that have been listening the very first hour on our local station, which we do, we did mention that you have met and know Scott Pruitt. But here is an individual that, according to our first article, has the biggest target on his back other than Donald Trump. So I guess if you're the head of the EPA and are going to roll back and have been rolling back all those regulations, there are a lot of people that want to get you out of office as quickly as possible.
They do. Yes, I do know Scott Pruitt. Haven't talked to him for a good while, but I do know him. Yes, the left has seen the EPA as sort of the spearhead for their agenda, especially on the environment. And in another sense, in the way in which you try to get things done in Washington. If you can't get it through a Republican Congress, you just get the agencies and the various departments to do your work for you, without having to go through the legislative process. And that's what had been happening under the Barack Obama administration, is a number of these agencies were essentially moving much further than the law allowed them to do it under what they might consider sort of relatively innovative interpretations of their power and moving on with their agenda. And this is where Barack Obama at one point said, I want to do all these things. The Republicans won't do it. I'm going to do it anyway. If you don't like it, sue me. And of course they did.
Well, and again, let's be honest. Isn't it fair to say that Scott Pruitt probably should have expected more scrutiny than the typical cabinet officer?
He should have, because of the being at the EPA and because of his plan to sort of roll it back. And Donald Trump, there weren't that many agencies that Donald Trump really opposed when he came in, but the EPA was one of them because they had given him so many fits as he was building hotels and so forth in years past. So you should go into that knowing that it's going to be an issue. Make sure that everything you do is not just considered legal but above reproach in everything so that nobody could attack it or criticize it. And it may be, it's always a little hard to know because there's differing versions, but I'm not sure that Scott was as diligent on that as he might have been.
They really weaponize the sort of the ethical, some of the things he did, he even had approved through ethics groups at the EPA. But for instance, one of them that's being criticized is when he first came to D.C., he rented a room from the wife of an Oklahoma attorney law firm partner. That law firm has energy companies as clients, and he got a pretty good nightly rate for that until he moved his family there when he rented a regular place. So that, I mean, it's just it seems like a small thing, but they've blown it up all out of proportion, and those things could have been easily avoided by being a little bit more proactive that you are going to be under attack. Scott Pruitt, for instance, he is Attorney General of Oklahoma, and so he himself sued the Obama administration a lot, just like our Attorney General here in Texas does, over environmental issues and other things. So he should have known that he would be a target of the left. He has been. He's been so effective, and that's the problem that the left has with him. They want him gone. And I think one of the timing issues that could be playing into this is the fact that they're now rolling back Obama's fuel efficiency CAFE standards. And, this is going to be a really big deal. He brought them in at the end of his administration. He increased the CAFE standard from 20-something miles an hour to like 54. And our
and that's over time. It's not immediately, but
right. It's going to be over time. But what it's going to do is not allow people to drive the kinds of safer cars that they want to drive.
And what happens is the car makers will sometimes say, well, okay, we've got to meet this average standard. So we know people want SUVs and trucks. That's what we sell, and that's what we make our profit on. So we'll make some small cars, hybrids, and other things that we know most people won't buy. We'll lose some money on those, but we'll make those so that our corporate standard will actually be within the realm of what they're doing. And so it forces the car manufacturers to make more cars that people don't, or to move those manufacturers offshore into Mexico or other places where they can get cheaper labor, so they're losing less money on it.
Yes. Well, again, that line that we've used before, coffee won't kill you, but CAFE standards will. Because, Penna, you've pointed that out as well, that when we are producing these really small cars, these micro cars, the body count, unfortunately, goes up, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why people don't want them. I mean, a lot the mom and dad who have a couple of kids, they want to drive something that's a little heavier, that puts a little bit of steel around them, not those little cars. And, just everyone makes that calculation when they buy an automobile. So, give the American people what they want. That's really the free enterprise system, and I think that's where things have turned, in a sense, under Scott Pruitt, and so the left doesn't like that.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, but let me just mention that you'll be hearing for some time all sorts of things. First of all, will Donald Trump keep Scott Pruitt there? I love what the Wall Street Journal said. Donald Trump demands loyalty up the chain of command, but loyalty down has been another matter. So we'll see whether or not, as they said, the test of loyalty will go down in that direction. But the other thing you won't hear, but I thought I might mention that the previous two administrators of the EPA spent a lot of money on travel. And nobody seems to be mentioning that, only what was spent now. For example, Lisa Jackson was the EPA director from 2009 to 2013, spent $332,000 on airfare. And the more recent EPA director, Gina McCarthy, spent $630,000 on airfare and security. Of course, Scott Pruitt has had perhaps more death threats to him than anybody else. And if you'd like to read this article by Molly Hemingway, it is the first article on our website, pointofview.net. Come back, let's get into the issue of immigration, of the very significant elections that are taking place. And what about trade? All of it coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager stirred up some controversy by saying something progressives would never let you say. As a Jew, he says that American Jews are the luckiest Jews in Jewish history. He also says that about many other ethnic groups. As I've mentioned in a previous commentary, his father wrote his senior thesis on anti-Semitism in America. Nevertheless, he taught his two sons that they were the luckiest Jews in Jewish history. Dennis Prager still believes that, even though he has written a book about anti-Semitism and taught Jewish history at Brooklyn College. He reminds us that many more Israeli Jews have moved to America than American Jews have moved to Israel. That's not a reflection on Israel, but a reflection on how good it is for Jews to live in America. He then moves on to black Americans. Despite the existence of racism in America, he also makes the case that black Americans are among the luckiest blacks in the world. He even quotes from Keith Richburg, a distinguished black journalist who admits that though his ancestors were brought here on slave ships, he was grateful to be an American when he saw the present-day horrors of Africa. In a moment of candor, he revealed, "I thank God my ancestor made that voyage." What about people from Latin America? Dennis Prager comes to the same conclusion. They are among the luckiest Latinos in the world. How could they or anyone else deny the fact that millions of Latin Americans have been willing to leave their family, their friends, their culture, and their language to come to America? And we know that there are tens of millions more who desire to do the same. Of course, there are many in this country that claim America is the source of evil. They claim that racism and bigotry are alive. They ignore the good of America and focus only on what is wrong. But they may not admit it, but they also are some of the luckiest people in the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, is Weekend Edition. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. He is, of course, the resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, IPI.org, and we'll talk more about that before the end of the hour on how you can get some of the great material there. And Dr. Matthews, I thought we might just talk about this because one of the articles, which we alluded to just a minute ago, Nancy Pelosi, if we win, we're going to turn back the clock by repealing the new law and massively increasing taxes. I just put it up there because I'm just not sure the best way to run in a mid-year kind of election, and this is certainly kind of at the midpoint, is to say we're going to raise your taxes, because usually if you just don't do anything wrong at all, the party out of power, that would be the Democratic Party, usually wins sometimes 24 plus seats in the House. But if you run by saying we're going to raise your taxes and saying don't look at your paychecks that are actually larger than they were before, don't look at the economy, which seems to be doing well, just vote us in, that's not a great strategy. Am I missing something here?
I think Nancy is taking a page out of the playbook of Republicans in 2010, where they passed Obamacare without any Republican votes.
Yes.
And the public was very upset about that.
Right.
And Republicans built on that. And they highlighted, you elect us, we will repeal it. They didn't do it, still didn't get to do it, even after had the majority in the House, Senate, and the White House. But I suspect that's what they're trying to do, is say, but the irony here is the tax bill has actually been getting more popular as time.
True.
It was generally unpopular when they passed it because of all the negative press that the media was doing on it. It has gotten more popular, and my guess it will be even more popular if once we get in November.
It's hard to argue with a bigger paycheck.
Yes.
Hard to argue with the bigger paycheck. Though Trump's somewhat erratic response on the trade issues and so forth.
Okay, here we go.
Because the Wall Street Journal was right earlier this week. He said, remember when Trump was talking about how well the stock market's doing? Don't hear much from him anymore right now. And I saw it last night as soon as he came out and said, maybe I'll toss another $100 billion in tariffs on China products because of their intellectual property theft. The market futures just tanked, went down about 450, 500 points right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, and again, I've had some people around this roundtable before saying if the president would just have radio silence for just a couple of weeks, he wouldn't be at, what's the latest, 51% approval rating? He would be maybe in the 60% approval rating, because even people that approve of him go, I don't like what he says, but I do like what he does.
Yeah.
And there's a point at which don't like what he says can affect your vote. But if the economy is doing well, Penna, doesn't that, if more money is in my hands and we bring more jobs back to America, we bring and repatriate maybe $1 trillion or $2 trillion. If all that happens before November, there's not a major terrorist attack or anything like that, that seems like it's not going to look as well for the party out of power. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's not that much time, and a lot of people are saying, well, this is a negotiating tactic. All these all these threats about trade and tariffs on Chinese goods. And, once this plays out, it might be different than it is right now. But it's not, as we were saying during the break, watching this is not for the faint of heart. This is very nerve-wracking to watch, first of all, a great tax bill that could just have such wonderful ramifications for our economy. And then statements being made, tariffs being imposed that could really derail the good that's being done. So, we don't have that much time, and it's going to be difficult to watch. I want to go back to Nancy Pelosi a little bit because, you can't argue with a bigger paycheck. The economy's getting better. Companies are giving out bonuses, adding to the 401k, all sorts of things happening, building new facilities and things. And yet we have to, when the Republicans will be reminding voters that the Democrats, not one Democrat voted for the tax cut. And then they get to have the sound bites from Nancy Pelosi on top of that for their campaign ads. So those types of things will help Republicans. But I don't know. This is a big election, and it's going to be bad for Donald Trump if he loses the House. It's going to be really bad for him.
It's going to be really bad. It will be nonstop impeachment hearings, investigations, and other things. If he's concerned about feeling like he's being unfairly treated with the special counsel and other thing now, wait until Democrats control the House or Senate.
Yeah.
But just to add to this, the businesses got very optimistic once the tax cut bill passed. Now with the threat of tariffs looming out there, then the question is, do we as a business go and hire? We're now having to pay more for steel. I talked to a man, a friend this week who's overseeing the building of a school here in our area, public school. They just got the notice the cost for their rebar that they're using in the concrete went up $100,000.
Yes, it did.
Went up $100,000. That makes employers nervous.
Yeah.
They may say we're not gonna hire those people we thought we were going to do because the economy was looking good. And then plus, even though roughly only half of the people are actually in the stock market, when you see those numbers in the stock market going down, I think it conveys, and 24-hour coverage of it, I think it conveys sort of a negative impression. Even if the economy is doing good and employers are hiring, this doesn't look good.
Yes. Well, and again, you're not going to hear some of the stories. One of the reasons we post articles here, even in this article, which is the fourth article we've posted, Representative Steve Scalise pointing out the largest bonuses given out ever. Congratulations to any of you up there in Wichita. The Wichita Railway Services gave its employees anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 in bonuses because of the tax cuts. Wow. Now, that's a good job if you could get it. I mean, my goodness, can you imagine somebody just saying, I'm going to give you $6,000 right now? How are they going to feel about the tax cuts? They're going to feel pretty good about it.
Which is great news if the media could cover it. But when the media is doing 24/7 on the trade war and the stock market tanking, Donald Trump is stepping on his own message.
Yep. And of course you have to add Stormy in there, a few other things to make it tough as well. Let's give you a chance to join our conversation. A couple of things. First of all, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the culture? Steve Moore the other day pointed out that when you look just a few years ago, and you don't have to go back more than 2 years, and ask people, do you think that the economy is good or great? It was in about the 20% range or something like that. Now it's at the 75% range. So that shows that most people feel pretty good about the economy. But again, how do you feel about the economy? Number two, how do you feel about this coming election? Is this one where the Democrats will indeed take over the House of Representatives? Or do you think that because of some of the economic changes that this will not be quite the bloodbath that some people are expecting it to be? We'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Penna?
Wow, don't ask me that question. My jury is out. I don't know.
It's like a cedar. Remember the teeter-totter? There's some things that make it yes, some things that make it no. I mean, there's just a sense in which you can put some on each side and make one go up or the other go down. And right now, down seems to be where the stock market is going at the moment because of the tariffs. Now, to be fair, yesterday we did talk about the negotiated trade deals with South Korea. And that was remarkable. The limit used to be on the number of cars that South Korea would allow into that from various manufacturers. They have, first of all, doubled that, but the Americans never actually reached the quota anyway because of all the trade restrictions. So because South Korea needs the United States more than the United States needs South Korea, that renegotiated trade deal was a good one. But that's not working out very well with China, is it?
It's not right now, but we keep hearing from the administration, nothing's been imposed really yet. Well, the steel tariffs have, but most of these other things are to be discussed in our negotiations over the next several months. We're asking for input from businesses. It'll be discussed, and then there'll be input later if we don't get the deal we want. So all that's sort of up in the air. But that's not what people hear. What they hear is it sounds like new trade tariffs, China's responding, stock market's going down, people getting jittery, and that affects the mood.
Well, again, our third article here is one I would really encourage people to read as well, because this particular one talks about China holding treasuries, but on the second page, it's got this great graph, and it shows you why China's in the mix, because the largest trade deficit we have far beyond any of the others. As a matter of fact, the next 9 aren't collectively as bad as the one with China. And, of course, China also holds these treasuries, so that's something to talk about in just a minute. So we will do so, but also want to give you a chance to join our conversation today. We've talked about the economy. We've talked about the elections. Those are the E's there, and even the issue of trade. We'll get into the immigration issues and some of those as well, because we have a lot more to cover. But if you'd like to join us, last half hour here, open line, 1-800-351-1212. Love to get your comments. And the lines are open, 1-800-351-1212. Or, of course, you can also leave a comment on our Facebook page, because we broadcast Facebook Live, and you can do that at pointofview.net as well. We'll be right back.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View, so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter and Merrill Matthews with us today. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Thought we'd talk about immigration for just a minute because Gary Bowers put together some facts and figures that are helpful to understand. And, of course, we've been talking about this week the People Without Borders group that actually put together a caravan starting on March 25th using the Stations of the Cross, made their way to Mexico, said they would halt in Mexico City, but some marchers have vowed that they would continue on. And I like what Gary Bowers says. We simply cannot have caravans coming across the border, and points out that last year the Border Patrol apprehended 310,000 illegal immigrants, I should say. That works out to about 850 people each and every day, and that is actually down because of what's called the Trump effect. But he's turned the phrase and said, now we've got what's called the progressive effect, and that is it's being replaced by progressive politicians who are thwarting border security plans, vote for Congress that actually in some ways prohibits building a new wall, as well as an economic uptick that I think attracts people here and this caravan. So, Penna Dexter, if nothing else, what we find right now is that if you thought 850 people a day crossing illegally, of course, those are just the ones that are caught, that number is going to go up rather dramatically, and that's why the president the other day signed an order to actually deploy the National Guard to the southern border.
I think what he does has a symbolic effect, and it has a deterrent effect. For instance, this whole caravan that was coming north, Trump started talking about National Guard troops and expanding the protections and building a wall. And you had that kind of disperse and never make it. It's not making it to the U.S. border. And so I think some of the things that the president says help in the situation. And so in that sense, that's good just as it is. But also I think the idea of sending National Guard troops to the states, the governors cooperate in this, is a good idea. We need to do that anyway.
Well, again, one of the issues that I think we have to recognize is that even though you would hear, and this is something Dr. Merrill Matthews was talking about with the other issue with the economy, it's also that with immigration, because you would think that all the American people were against what's called the militarization of the border, or the fact that we're waging a trade war. But Gary Bauer also has some statistics. 8 out of every 10 voters want less immigration than what our system provides right now. 8 out of 10 want an immigration system based on merit, not family relations. 8 out of 10 said they want secure borders. That would sound more like the things that Donald Trump is talking about and less about what the open borders people are talking about.
You know, it's interesting when you say 8 out of 10 want less immigration than what our system allows right now. Our system actually doesn't allow that many immigrants. It's a fairly small number of people who are able to come legally, which is one reason why you get so many others coming across. But those who are looking for what we call H-1B visas, H-2B visas, people who are skilled or not so skilled coming in, those are fairly small numbers. And usually when those open up, those slots open up in April, I believe, the number of slots, which is usually in several thousands, but are filled within, in fact, they used to be filled within 1 or 2 days of the slots opening up. So it gets back to the issue of we need to have a immigration system where you do have people who can come here legally to work. They're able to go back home and so forth. Doesn't mean you're citizens. Doesn't mean you bring your kids here, or if your wife comes and has a child, that person's a citizen. It just means we make sure we can accommodate some of those legally. And, you know, right now these people are paying sometimes $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 to a coyote to get them across. If you had a system where you were either taking that money or $3,000 or $4,000, using that to pay for your wall or something else, you could, that would have Mexicans and other Central Americans paying for the wall.
If we have a good immigration system, then it should be planned so that we can control the kind of people that we get to come in here. That should be the prerogative of a country. We don't have to take everyone that knocks at our door. We need to decide what kind of workers we need. Maybe we don't need them to live here permanently. We only need them for a season. And then we need to implement that kind of a system.
Well, let's take some phone calls along the way. If you'd like to join us, 888-351-1212. Let's head out to California first. David, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yeah, how are you? I call once in a while. I'm the guy from San Francisco. I really take exception to Christians acting like this is an invasion. I've listened to a bunch of radio stations for the last few days, and people are talking about taking an atom bomb to these people, and that we need to take fire bombs and, sniper them from across the border, and some of the most hateful language that's coming out of this. But I would agree with you, by the way. I don't know where that's coming from. I don't even know who's saying that, but I would certainly reject that, of course. Well, sure. And, when you imagine that Jesus was born on the run, he was born as a refugee, and he had to escape to Egypt to avoid being killed. The issue of being a sanctuary, whether a sanctuary country or a sanctuary city, is very important to Christianity. And the idea that we're being trapped by some hateful rhetoric. And I've mentioned to you before on earlier calls that I believe Donald Trump to be organized crime. He takes advantage of these issues, and he wants to basically steal land. So when you imagine, here it is springtime, the crops need to be put in. For 100 years, Mexicans have come across the border to help plant the crops and to harvest the crops, whether it's California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, throughout. I mean, frankly, all the way up to Minnesota, the immigrants have been coming in to help with the crops. And what's, the strategy at planting time? To make the fiercest competition to get across the border, and that's going to guarantee that farmers are not going to get their crops in, and they're going to lose their land. And who's there to swoop up and pick up on all of that land but a great big developer named Donald Trump and his buddies? Hard for me to believe that, but nevertheless, it's an interesting thought. We've had he does raise a good question. We used to have migrant workers, yes. And it does seem and that's the thing. There is a sense in which we've been talking about this idea of visas and work permits and things of that nature. That needs to be part of any kind of immigration policy, doesn't it? And David's right about this. We do use agricultural workers, many of them coming from south of the border. In an ideal immigration system, they could come across, do the work, go back home, because a lot of them want to be able to go back home without having to come back across illegally. It sounded like David doesn't mind if they come across. The real problem here is having a system where you know who they are, you know why they're coming in, you're tracking them, you know they're going back at times, they pay something to come in to work for a while. That helps the employers, it rationalizes the system, and it keeps the animosity, I would argue, down from immigrants, where we have typically been a system that's open to immigrants, especially persecuted people. One of the things I've said before, and see if you agree with this, is that we've sometimes made legal immigration so difficult that it spawned illegal immigration. Right. Let's go back to that. About 1 million people each year come in here legally. During the height of some of the attempts to cross the border and overstay visas, sometimes you'd had as many as 100 million, or, 1 million people, I should say. I overdid the numbers. 1 million people come in here illegally, and then about 1 million people legally. That's declined dramatically. But if we didn't put people through so many hoops and all sorts of difficulties to try to become citizens of America, we might not have some of these problems with illegal immigration, don't you think? I think that's right. And the problem we have right now is, like so many issues, it's become so polarized, where Democrats, I think, want them not only to be able to come in, but to be able to move to citizenship fairly quickly and vote. And Republicans are pushing back on that for a number of reasons. Well, and you can find some quotes from some of these leaders in the Democratic Party who just a few years ago, including even presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, who actually pointed to the problem of illegal immigration. Now, of course, you can't even say things about illegal immigration in the Democratic Party sometimes. Donald Trump has talked about a status that wouldn't be a citizen, but that would be legal. Yeah.
And so, I kind of wonder what people think about that.
Yeah, I would love to know your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some more of those calls in just a minute. We've posted a couple of articles here, but one of those, of course, is the dysfunctional immigration system that we have right now. And we've heard, first of all, this week, even from people, for example, one that called from the border who was literally outside just saying, you have no idea what it's like. I'm only 20 minutes from the border, about the people coming across and all the disruption that is taking place there. And then in the past, we've heard from people from Germany, from England, from South Africa, from Canada, to mention just a few, who just take us through how long it took for these very qualified, worthwhile individuals to finally become a citizen of the United States. We make it too difficult. We make them jump through too many hoops. We force them to actually have to deal with so many bureaucratic bungles that you can understand why sometimes people say, if I want to come to America, I'm just going to overstay my visa, or I'm just going to cross the border. That's it.
Yep.
Well, and I want to get your comments on that, but we have one of those mandatory breaks, so we'll get Dr. Merrill Matthews' comments right after this.
On the campaign trail, candidate Trump unveiled a child care proposal that included 6 weeks of guaranteed paid maternity leave. Back then, no one expected anything close to this to get through the GOP House. But, as Washington Post columnist George Will points out, limited government conservatism has become a persuasion without a party. The recently passed Tax Cuts and Jobs Act adds a new tax credit for employers that provide paid family and medical leave benefits to employees. The Family and Medical Leave Act that's been in place for 25 years provides certain job protections for people taking leave, but no requirement that this be paid leave. George Will points out that even many conservatives support paid family leave in the name of family values, and because free stuff polls well. But someone will pay for this. George Will titles his column on this issue, Paid Maternity Leave? Your Baby Will Get the Bill. He writes, the debate will concern ways to disguise the benefit's cost while requiring others to pay for it. One proposal is to pay for family leave through unemployment insurance. This would involve a new tax or an expanded payroll tax. Another idea is to allow new parents, moms and dads, to collect a few weeks of Social Security payments while agreeing to have that amount chopped off of what they get when they're eligible. A risky proposition on several levels. What happened to the expectation that somebody in the household works so the family can support this child? Is this now retrograde, wonders George Will? Some companies provide paid family leave for female employees and even male employees. It's their choice, and a good way to attract young workers. But the left seeks to mandate this, temporarily settling for incentives like this tax credit. We need to think long and hard before adding another entitlement to the list being funded by trillion-dollar deficits. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We'll do our best to get in as many phone calls as we can. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We will go out to California. KNLB. Sandra, what's your point of view?
Hi. I have family that were born in here during when it was New Spain. From Texas on through to New Mexico, Arizona, and I am from California. and my grandfather, I was born during the war, just after Pearl Harbor, and I used to have a tow sack. My grandparents only had the Mexican workers come in one time, but after that, we had a tow sack. I had my own tow sack, and I got out in the fields, and even up in the 40s, we went out in the fields, and that's the only time that my grandfather ever led the Braceros movement. And Braceros movement was, had so many people in the war effort, it was just impossible. They had to have help in the crops to feed and some of these crops were for war-based issues during the war. And now you can't even get a job unless you're Mexican. You can't get a job out in the fields. These people come in here and stay, and they get free food stamps, free this, free that, free this, free college. I didn't get free college, and I just don't approve of. I think they should have a stricter movement because
they get free college in California. Illegals?
Yes, up here at this college, these people, I've seen them come in and get new papers. In fact, I was up at the college and sitting around a table, and one of the kids there wasn't born in the United States, and he bragged about, I know where you can get papers, and because I've seen it myself. I was having a cup of tea down at the local McDonald's. They come in and they bring them a driver's license and whatever you need.
Well, let me ask one other question about something you said. You mentioned that if you aren't, of, I guess, Mexican descent or illegal, you can't get a job in the fields?
No, not anymore. Nobody goes out in the fields. Back when I was growing up.
Because they don't want to or because they can't?
Well, it's just a click. You can't, you're not going to get hired.
Well, I remember something else, and that is, I remember, my wife, for example, used to pick strawberries and things like that, but now child labor laws prevent a lot of those, too. You're talking about they were going out there with a tow sack, and there are certain things you can and can't do because of certain rules and regulations. And, my father-in-law, he was a farmer, and he finally said, I'm going to put together crops that I can do with just John Deere tractors because just the hassle of bringing people in and out all the time is something to think about. But there are a lot of calls, so I'm just going to keep moving down the line here and give as many of you a chance to join the conversation, make your comment. It is called Point of View. So let's go to Kathy, also calling in from KNLB in California. Kathy, what would you like to share with us today?
Yes, I am from Southern California, and I'm a Christian, and I know other Christians that do not believe in nuking or sniper shooting or any of that.
Sure, yeah. I don't even know where that came from. Go ahead. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, just recently up in Northern California, there were 3 homes that were raided by the federal government that was being ran by Chinese growing pot. Okay? And the
it's
other
legal
thing
there.
Is,
yeah. But not federally.
Yes. And according to them, and according to Hannity in 2013 or 14, he had a gentleman who admitted that he was illegally in this country and that he wasn't a United States citizen, who went to college, became a lawyer, and took the state bar in California.
Wow.
Now then, if he's practicing and he's not a United States citizen, how many of the states is that going on that they're not going and enforcing the rule of law, or they're changing the rule of law? They're usurping our laws.
Well, again, you might understand why they wanted to also ask a question about citizenship, too, because we just don't know how many are here legally and how many are citizens and all. That's why I think an accurate census would be really helpful, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
I think an accurate census would be very helpful. And you may get some non-participation because of that, but they also have various ways now where they're trying to track that through the past, through records and other things.
Yeah. And neighbors even.
And neighbors.
Well, I'm just going to keep moving through the calls. Let's go to the state of Georgia this time. And Curtis, what would you like to share with our listening audience?
Hey, thank you for taking my call. I've been working the Hispanic people for about 15 years now. I went through the legal process, and I have the H-2B visas for the guys, and we really need more. I think there are only like 66,000 H-2B visas.
Yes.
That they let go each year. But my problem with that is that they come over, they get a legal Social Security number, and that qualifies them for all the benefits of Social Security. And they've learned the system, and they come in and because they only work part time, most of them qualify for earned income credit. So then they claim 9 or 10 dependents, and then the government winds up sending them huge checks. And I mean it's astronomical the money that they get back from Social Security when they ought to be paying a flat tax to be able for the privilege to come here and work. And that's there's a problem with this system.
I'm not aware that H-2B visa allows you to participate in Social Security, but you do have to work 10 years, 40 quarters in order to be eligible for Social Security. So unless they're getting all of that in, even if it does, they have to get in the 10 years in order to be able to qualify for it. Just somebody who works a few years is not qualified.
But I personally witnessed the checks that they receive. More than what they paid in. I've seen this.
Well, and this was one of the issues with Donald Trump when he said we're going with Barack Obama when he allowed to take the Dreamers and put in their families. He sort of gave them a pass also, which got us to 4 or 5 million. Those people would be able to work in and then be eligible for Social Security and Medicare. He initially said that's going to actually help Social Security. It might initially, but they could be working for 10 or 12 years and then get 30 or 40 years of benefits out of it.
So that also gets us into fraud. You have co-authored or at least participated in a book on Medicaid fraud and things like that. And if people wanted to know a little bit more about what you do at the Institute for Policy Innovation, talk about that. IPI.org.
Institute for Policy Innovation is a 501(c) nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, research institute, commonly called a think tank. And anybody can go to our website, IPI.org, and download any of that material and share it, read it, consume it for free.
Well, again, you can not only hear and read some of the great material by Dr. Merrill Matthew, but some of the other individuals at the Institute for Policy Innovation. So, Dr. Matthews, always great to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Penna Dexter, next week we have Truth Team. I know you'll be joining us on Friday, but this will be a chance to encourage our listeners to support this ministry. And we're going to be hearing from Gary Bauer and Michael Ferris and Foster Fries and Jerry Tuma and Lee Strobel, to mention just a few off the top of my head that'll all be with us next week.
It's always a special week.
So again, I would encourage you, if you find yourself saying, boy, they covered a lot of material in these few hours, and you'd like to read it again, we have some articles that we've posted on the website, pointofview.net. As I mentioned just a minute ago, if you'd like to know more about the Institute for Policy Innovation, Dr. Merrill Matthews is the resident scholar there, and there is great material there, which I use so often, ipi.org. And, of course, our website is pointofview.net. It will give you lots of information as well about the film that we talked about in the last hour, Paul, the Apostle of Christ. I hope you'll go and see that this weekend. And I hope you have a great weekend, because next week is our Truth Team week, an opportunity to hear from some great scholars and commentators, but also a chance for us to come before you and ask for your financial support. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We will see you back here on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.